Still Loading is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people such as Gilmer, Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Eric H., Charles M., Stephen P., and Mr. Biscuits have been wonderful enough to support the show over there. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode like this, along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything there is to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, the most relaxing video games. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, I have a wonderful guest for you today. We're talking about a recently released book that he wrote. I am joined by Ryan Janes, the author of the recently released book, The Most Relaxing Video Games. He is also a reviewer for Nintendo Insider, and he also works at FanCensus, which is a PR marketing company type of thing, which I'm sure we'll go into a little bit. But Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Josh. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I've been looking forward to this. I really enjoyed reading the bits and pieces of the book that I did. I read your intro, and I just kind of picked some of my favorite games out on there because there's a lot of games on here, and I've interviewed a lot of people who've done kind of not similar things. Like it's similar in the sense that you pick a topic and then you find games that fit that topic, so it's a list of games. But what I really like about your book, and this is no shade being thrown to the previous guests and the previous authors, shout out to Chris Carden and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the other guests that I had who wrote similar books. Oh, James Batchelor and whatnot. Their books were very much like quick hits. You get in and out. There's a whole lot of games crammed into the book, but that kind of gives you a really nice idea of like all these different games that fit into this topic. What I like about your book is that you spend a lot more time and energy into the individual games as opposed to trying to be not necessarily comprehensive. You're going for more of a personal touch to this, and I really enjoy that. I really liked what I had read of your book. So let's talk about this. What was the inspiration for this book? Like, obviously the listeners can tell from the title, it's about the most relaxing video games, but what kind of made you want to write this in the first place?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. But in terms of the inspiration, it's interesting because, I'd want to say, as someone who deals with anxiety and has done, from childhood all the way to, the age I am now,
Mm-hmm.
I've always found these types of games to be a great way to, calm and refocus and just sort of, get back into a situation where I'm more in control of my emotions. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's the simple answer I want to give. But originally I approached the publisher Pen and Sword Books and said, I have this idea for a book, which was it was the title I had, which was A Game for Any Occasion. And the idea of the book was going to be that each chapter will be focused on a different subject. Games that are perfect to relax with, games that are perfect for to finish in one session, games that make good drinking games, all sort of fun ones that are a bit more focused. And they liked the idea, but they said, I think there's enough content for each individual chapter here that you could pick one and do a book on that. And then that's how it came about. The relaxing one was the one that stood out to me. Like, yeah, it would be amusing to do one on drinking games, sure, but the relaxing side, it felt more personal to me, and a lot of the games in the list that like straight away I could just formulate a list of 20, 30, 40 games right off the bat where I was like, this has got to be in it, this has got to be in it, because this has really helped me. So as I say, it's come from personal experience of how these games, and don't get me wrong, games in general have helped me. Like even if it's not relaxing, they are a great way to keep your mind
Hmm.
occupied and busy. But these ones in particular would, I always felt that when I had those moments of struggle or weakness, these would be what I would turn to throughout the years.
And the books that you or excuse me, the games that you have chosen in this book are very different than what you I think most people would expect out of a game, or about a book about. Oh my gosh, I'm mixing up book and games. It's a lot different than what people would expect out of a book all about relaxing games. Like yes, there are a lot of games on here that I would consider, something that is very relaxing. For example, this is for my own personal story, Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley, I did an episode on it back in 2020. That game means a lot to me because when my wife and I were prepping for our wedding and preparing for our wedding, this is the game that we played to kind of relax and hang out and chill and decompress with all the stress of wedding planning. And I was telling you off, Mike, my wife's not a gamer, man. Like she's not into a lot of the stuff that I'm into. And so for the fact that she got as hooked on Stardew Valley as I did really kind of says something to the effect of, or it illustrates the point you're trying to make, is just what games can do for anxiety and how it can help calm people and soothe the anxious soul, which it definitely does for me.
Mm.
So Stardew Valley is like immensely important to me personally. So when I was worried when I first was contacted by you, and I'm like, yeah, I would love to talk to you about this. And when I got the book, actually shout out to White Owl for the review copy of the book. Um, I was like, if Stardew Valley isn't on there, I'm gonna be mad.
It's
Not
funny
really, of
because
course.
we have a very similar story, my wife and I, where Animal Crossing New Horizons is
Mm,
that game. Because I mean, it was one of those sort of situations with Nintendo where that game couldn't have come out at a more perfect time for them,
exactly.
because we were all going into lockdown, the world was in a terrible state at the time, and when you're locked inside your house or staying inside your house, day after day, that was the game that we bought a copy each of, and then we would just go to this island and we would be, filling our time with that until, oh, can we trade? You've got cherries, I've got oranges. Can we trade? Because they're worth
Hmm.
more over here, and oh, let me visit your island and see, what you've built here. It would be a chance to escape for us from what was going on in the real world, and as a result, it would be sort of, that emergency lever you could pull to calm you and relax you. When, as I say, what was going on around you was anything but.
Hmm. Well, and I've said it before, but like Animal Crossing New Horizons is arguably one of the most important games of the last like 5 to 10 years. Not necessarily because it's the best game of the last 5 to 10 years, but it, like you said, it came out at the perfect time. And I always harp on this on the show about video game history and context being a really underrepresented part of game history. When people think of game history, they think of like, oh, here's a book or here's a game, and here is a bunch of history about the development and this and that. When that's definitely part of it, but there's also context around the development. There's also context around when it was released and like why was a game popular. Uh, why was it well received? Why was it poorly received? And Animal Crossing, Animal Crossing New Horizons was the perfect storm of that, where we had just gone into lockdown from the pandemic, and this game was a way for people to almost live a life that they couldn't out in the real world at that very moment. And it gave people a way to escape and also to connect because of the whole visiting people's islands and stuff like that. And as
Yeah,
you were saying, being able to share fruit with each other by visiting to each other's islands.
for
That
sure.
game, oh, it's so good, man. I haven't played in it. I have not played it in a while, but it's hard to believe that that game is 4 years old at this point.
Yeah, I know. Time flies. I mean, funnily enough, not necessarily a relaxing game, but another game that again felt like one of those like perfect storm situations was Among Us. When that game
Mm,
launched, it didn't really take off in a major way.
yep.
But again, with everyone locked in their houses and not able to interact with each other, in person, Among Us was almost like a way to do that. And it was one of those things that when I came across that game, it was like, let's get all our friends together, even those that don't play video games, because it's basically Werewolf the video game in a way. If you've ever played
Yep.
that, but I felt like Werewolf is one of those things that when you play it, it's just mindless pointing at people. It's like, oh, I heard a noise over there. It doesn't mean anything, but I'm going to blame you and say you're the werewolf just because, or you're being too quiet. But if you're too loud, I will probably pick you as well. But
hmm
with Among Us, funnily enough, that was something we would turn into a weekly thing because it allowed us to, of course, just chat normally, but then play this game and have a lot of fun. And actually, it like reignited a number of friendships with people I hadn't even spoken to since I
Oh,
was at
that's awesome.
secondary school, and now we're closer than ever. So there's, even through tough times, there can be positive that come from it in other ways as well. So yeah, Among Us definitely was another one that you have that perfect storm situation. As perhaps if there wasn't this pandemic that had been going on, would Among Us become what it is today? Perhaps not.
Also, Fall Guys kind of falls into that. No pun intended. Falls into that as well with that. I remember it getting really big because of the pandemic.
Mm,
And I was not personally a fan of Fall Guys, not for any particular reason. Just that style of game just has never really appealed to me. But it's still really cool to see a game like that, like Among Us. And there's been other games in recent memory that like were released a little bit ago. Then all of a sudden, maybe not because of the pandemic now, but like for other reasons, all of a sudden it starts blowing up. I'm
mm.
blanking on one that's like really recent.
Helldivers 2, I think, is one that has just completely exploded in terms of popularity.
And the first one did not get a lot of fanfare.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even remember when that came out, and I can't remember it coming out, to be honest. But then seeing
I
the Starship Trooper style trailers they put out for it, I mean,
Mhm.
I think that connected with a lot of people because people have a fond memory of that movie, me included.
And it's
But
funny, I actually played the original one a ton. My friend Tristan played it, and he got me into it. And I actually, because when you bought it, it was crossplay.
mhm.
So I got it. I paid for one, and I got it on the Vita and the PS3 and the PS4 all at the same time. But I didn't have PS Plus, so I couldn't play on my PS4 because you have to pay. But the PS3, you didn't need to pay to play online with everyone. Same with the Vita. At least I don't think you needed with the Vita. And I would actually go over to his house with my Vita, and we would play multiplayer of the original Helldivers together. Me on my Vita, him on his PS3. It was a ton of fun.
Yeah, it was top down, wasn't it? The original, I think.
Yes.
Yeah,
What's is the new one like over the shoulder?
I think it's like first person. I might be wrong.
Oh,
I haven't
okay.
actually played it myself, but
Neither have
I
I.
believe it is first person. So they completely changed the style of the game from a drop top down
hmm
to first person.
So yeah, we've talked a little bit about your book. You know what it is. It's all about the most relaxing video games and kind of what inspired you. But what was your selection process like for choosing the games in the book? You know, there's a whole bunch of games in here, and like I said before, it's a little bit farther in the outline, but I really love that they're not just like a couple paragraphs, like one or two paragraphs about it. And once again, that makes it sound like I'm throwing shade at my previous guest. I don't mean it that way. This is just it's different, and I like that, especially because at the end of your, they're full on reviews. They're not just like little kind of snippets. They're full on reviews, and then you have a little fun fact, a did you know, at the end of each one, which I thought was really cool. And what was it? What was the one I read? One that like honestly blew my mind. It might have been for Animal Crossing New Horizons that there was like over 1,000 pieces of music sung by KK Slider in that game.
I'm trying to think now.
I'll look it up for you. But yeah, so while I'm looking that up, let's talk about the selection process because there's a whole bunch of games in here, and we'll talk about some of the specifics of them, not just the ones that people would probably not be surprised to see. There's a bunch that were surprising. But before we get into that, like, what was your selection process like?
So, I mean, initially it was personal experience. It was, games that I've
hmm
played because I would have like the best understanding of those games. I would feel very confident and comfortable writing about those games because I played them inside and out. So, I mean, that would feel like a good number of those, slots in the book. And fortunately, because I mean, I'm one of those people that is very OCD, and I actually have a spreadsheet cataloging every game that I own, whether it's physical or digital. All the information that is not necessarily going to be helpful in any way whatsoever. Like, here's the genre, here's how many players you can play this game with. And so for me, it was quite easy just to go through that list and basically pick out the ones that were, yeah, absolutely, Tetris Effect needs to be in here, or as I say, coming across ones that I would go, well, let's give this another go, and because it's been a while since I've played this, and let's check it out. And so that would fill a lot of of the list there. But then I would also go online and I would ask other people on forums and on Discord and say, look, I'm just curious. Like, there's obviously games out there that I've probably never played that people go to and turn to and find as a relaxing experience. What are they? And so I would then gather more games that way, and then go and purchase them or download them, and then play them for myself, and then of course make that decision and say, did I find that relaxing? Because at the end of the day, whatever list I came up with was always going to have people going, no way, that's insane. And Donkey Kong Country is probably one of the key examples.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that I was thinking of. There's also a few others, but yeah, Donkey Kong Country is one of the ones I'm like, really? A relaxing game? We'll get into that. I would actually like to pick that one apart a little bit. Not like critique it, but like get why you put on it. But sorry, continue with what you were saying.
Yeah, so that would be how I would create that list, and then it got to a stage where it was right. I need to cut this to a level where it's not going to just be me droning on and on and on and on, and just have hundreds of pages. So let's narrow it down to the ones that have had the greatest impact on me, be it ones that I've been playing for years or ones that have been introduced to me thanks to other gamers out there and I've experienced for the first time. And so that would be how the selection process would tend to work.
I was going to ask, because one of my other questions was, did you solicit any suggestions? Which you did. You went online, but did you solicit any opinions or suggestions from friends or colleagues besides just people like on message boards and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in fact, like, as I'm formulating the list, the first people I would turn to were the ones that were right there with me, and so I'd say, like, what do you go to when it comes to relaxing? And I found it to be the obvious choices were always chosen when it came to friends or colleagues or even family members who are gamers. So, they would say, oh, I would play 51 Worldwide Games I play because it's just board games in a cartridge, basically. Or I will play Flower. Have you heard of Flower? And so it would be the ones that I think a lot of people would suggest out the gate, the obvious choices. But then, that's not to their fault, because it's like saying, hey, what do you do to relax? Oh, I go to a spa and I get a massage. Like, of course, because they're relaxing activities. Someone is not immediately going to go, I play darts, or I go play rugby, because yes, it may be relaxing to them, but it's not an obvious choice. You're always going to go with the obvious one. So when I ask people, a lot of the suggestions would be ones that I've already had, or ones that I would then also get recommended by those online as well. So that's when I started to then look on the internet to gamers out there as well, because that's when you start to get those that are a bit more out there. And there are a few examples in this book as well. Like there's one in particular which we'll probably talk about when we talk about Donkey Kong as well, that as I was writing it, I'm looking at it and going, oh, is this a bad idea? Is this bad putting this one in here? Because I feel like it may get called out, because when you think about this game, and it's The Quarry, basically, which is a horror video game, and you would never say horror and relaxing go together. But that you mentioned about me writing, lengthier sections on each game, and that's because I wanted to give my reasoning behind this being here, not just give facts about the game and say this is what it is, this is the genre, this is what you can expect. This is why it's in here. These are the reasons why I feel this game is a great way to just sit back and chill.
I see. Now, you mentioned when you were talking about kind of like the selection and like talking to different people and everything about how you chose, like The Quarry, for example, was the one you mentioned about how hard doesn't necessarily go with relaxing. And I'm inclined to agree to an extent, but I listened to this other podcast called with Gorley and Rust. They're some of my favorite podcasters: Matt Gorley, Paul Rust. Paul Rust is an actor. Matt Gorley is as well, but he's more known now for podcasting. And they do a horror movie podcast. And it started in It was originally called In Voorhees We Trust with Gorley and Rust, and it was all about, the Friday the 13th movies. And then they what is it? Then they did the Halloween ones, and they called it In Myers We Trust with Gyers and Rust. Like, they just completely butchered Gorley's last. It's just ridiculous. It's really funny. So, but anyway, they talk about how, like, in some old horror movies, especially like older ones per se, the Quarry has like a very 80s style feel to it. Um, from what I've seen, at least the trailers, I've never
Yeah.
personally played it, but they talk about, like, there's an element of horror movies of coziness. Like, there's a coziness about some horror movies, and they talk about that in the especially like the Friday the 13th and Halloween movies and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Maybe not so much like the original Halloween, that's still pretty terrifying, but like Friday the 13th is like, it's scary, but it's like so campy at the same time. It kind of takes, I don't know how else to describe it. I haven't seen all of them myself. I'm in no way, shape, or form a horror expert, but I almost wonder if the Quarry kind of fits into that, about there's like a cozy element to horror. So I don't know, is there any, do you agree with that idea at all? Would you say the Quarry fits into that or, at all? I don't know where I'm going with this, but I find this idea of cozy horror interesting.
No, it's interesting. I've never heard as horror referred to as cozy, and I definitely feel like I need to listen to this podcast now as well, because personally, I am a fan of horror, and I get where they're coming from in terms of it being cozy. Because also, I feel like horror, the genre of horror, tends to be fairly formulaic. Not
Mm,
necessarily as of late, but when you do watch those older movies like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, even Scream, like they have this rhythm to them that you sort of fall into and are comfortable with. You know, there's going to be, for somebody, there's going to be an opening kill at the start. You know,
mm.
it's going to, and it's. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Cabin in the Woods, which came
I have,
out,
actually, yeah.
and that movie to me is sort of like, that is a love letter to horror fans of all those cliches. Everything you know about horror. We're going to really not necessarily make fun of it, but we're going to shine a light on it and really, turn that into a story, and a compelling one at that. And so you do see those moments about everyone splitting up, and we should all go our own ways, or someone who looks like they're dead, but actually they come back and they're not quite dead. All that sort of stuff. That, because it's happened so much in horror, you do feel. These movies can still scare you, but you do feel that element of comfort in, like, I know some, I can kind of guess what's going to come up. I know, things that tend to scare are the jump moments or the gory moments, but the actual elements, the cliches of those horror films do feel warm, especially if you are a fan of that genre.
Mhm.
Um, and so with The Quarry, I suppose it does fall into that category, because you are right in that it has those campy elements. It has that sort of 80s vibe. I mean, it's set in a camp, like Friday the 13th was. And it's
Mhm.
a bunch of teenagers, which again is something that is very common in the horror movie genre. And it's got a lot of those elements. And I think the reason that I put it in and originally was because the studio Supermassive Games, they've made a lot of Until Dawn was their first horror, like the horror sort of genre where you would make
Yeah.
decisions, and they've since done what is it? It's called Dark Pictures Anthology, where they've done about 3 or 4 of those. And again, it's the exact same sort of type of game where you've got these 6 characters or 5 characters or whatever, and you're making these decisions for them, which will either keep them alive, or maybe down the road it ends up getting them killed. And so for me, playing The Quarry, you don't quite feel like you're playing it. It's almost like an interact, like you're in the director's chair
Yeah.
of a horror movie. And it's something that, for me, like, I'm quite happy to just, turn the lights off, sit back on the sofa, get all comfy, and then just watch this play out. And but not necessarily be, at the mercy of the game, because like a movie, you have to just go along for the ride. But I can actually change the direction in which things are going, story wise and character wise. And so for me, because it's not an involved game, because you're not like mashing buttons wildly and trying to tackle bosses, it's more, I'm just choosing these decisions, and I'm just watching how these characters interact with each other, and it just becomes almost like a movie viewing experience, but with that added interactive element. So,
Yeah.
yes, if you look at the name and see The Quarry, and then it's like, oh, this is a horror game, then you're going to call foul on that and go, this guy's insane. Why has he put this in here? But as I say, hopefully the way I describe it in the book as well, like perhaps gives a good idea. Like, okay, maybe there is a case to be made for a game like this. Not
Well,
necessarily because it's horror, but because of the style of game it is.
yeah, and I think it's important that you kind of put those swings in there. I feel like if you went with the it's almost the safe route, that would make the book a little less a little less interesting. You know, like
Yeah.
I feel like by putting things in here that aren't necessarily something that I would consider like relaxing, it kind of like, but find a reason for them to be relaxing. Like, yeah, there's tons of ones that are obvious. One of my personal favorites, Journey, is in here.
Hmm.
That's one of my favorite games, just period. I actually was lucky enough, shout out to previous episode of the show, like from 2020. I interviewed it, oh my god, interviewed Austin Wintory, the composer for the game. And you also have Flower, the other game from that game company is the developer. um uh Untitled Goose Game, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, which I kind of secretly love. It's a really fun game. Um, I also want but to bring it back to the other unorthodox pick that we mentioned before. I mean, there's a handful. There's one other one that I thought was kind of interesting, which was, oh my gosh, where are you at? It was Portal 2, which I wouldn't really. It's a puzzle game, so not necessarily action, but I never really considered it relaxing. But the more uh obvious, or sorry, the the one that's probably the most shocking on here is Donkey Kong Country, which we referenced before. So kind of go into that. I read that chapter and I liked what you said about it. So I don't want you to give necessarily all of it away, so that way
Mm.
people go and read the book. But like, kind of what to you makes Donkey Kong Country a relaxing game despite its chaotic platforming?
I think when people think of Donkey Kong, they think of those minecart stages. I mean, I know I used to, because those are the ones
Hmm.
that would be, you
Oh,
absolutely have to be
they're so hard.
perfect. Yeah. But the reason I wanted to put it in there was for me, and even playing it now, like I try to play that game along with Super Mario World like every year. Like I'll always return to it because it's short enough that you can just, finish it in an evening. But it's the atmosphere, and it still holds up even today. Like, okay, the visuals, a lot of people I know are not big fans. They feel like it's aged a bit, but I think to me, I think it still looks pretty great. But it's the sound design, it's the music, like that is what really makes that game like give it that relaxing quality. I mean, when people think of not just relaxing music songs, but iconic songs, one of the big ones that always comes up is Aquatic Ambience from
Hmm.
the underwater levels, and it's also just the as I say, the sound design, the elements of when you're in a cave and you hear that echoey sound, and like the music in the cave level is not even music; it's more just noises that have been.
It's almost like atmosphere with a melody.
Exactly. And it's not like what you would see from Sonic the Hedgehog or what you would see from Super Mario at the time, where those are
Hmm.
just upbeat melodies that are playing along. This is a game that would use its environment, and that would be what helps make it stand out in a different way and not just be another platformer. And so for me, again, it's kind of similar to the it's the opposite of the Quarry, where the subject matter of it being a horror is not relaxing, but the style of game is what to me made it relaxing. I could just relax and just watch it play out. With Donkey Kong, it's the opposite, where the gameplay of because platformers by their very nature are not necessarily relaxing. I mean, Kirby games are probably one of the few exceptions there because there's such a low difficulty curve for those
Yeah.
titles. But from a presentation perspective, that's where the relaxing elements come from. And playing them when I was a kid, that has stuck with me even now. Even when you look at games that come out now, I find there's still just as much atmosphere to be had in those Donkey Kong games, and even the sequels as well. And the reason I put the first one is because, I mean, personally, I find the first one not to be too difficult compared, especially when you get to two. Two is probably, when it gets really really tough, especially when you get to some of those barrel focus levels. But
It's funny. I actually beat Donkey Kong Country for the first time this year. I've played it a bunch. I've never beaten it. And then my patrons, I did a thing in January, um, called where I did a big poll in January for my patrons, and it's for Backlog Month, which will be happening later this year. And it's basically I asked them to pick 4 different games. I put 16 games up on a poll. They could vote for as many games as they want, just one vote per game, but they could vote for as many games as they wanted.
Mhm.
And the 4 games with the most number of votes ends up being one of the games I cover in backlog month, and Donkey Kong Country won. One of them was one of the 4. The other 3 were Toe Jam and Earl for the
Mhm.
Genesis / Mega Drive, Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus, and what was the other? Oh, The Order 1886.
Oh, okay.
So I've actually beaten 3 out of the 4 already. At the time we're recording this, I haven't yet to start Dirge of Cerberus. That's the last one on my list, but it's I played Donkey Kong Country 1 for the first time, and you were saying before how it's like it's a pretty short game. One thing I was honestly surprised by, I really have to save my thoughts on the game for the episode, but this has been like something that's been in my mind since I beat it. I'm impressed at how fair it feels in terms of the save points.
Mhm.
There's a little bit of early 90s and old school gaming difficulty with it, where like you can't save in between levels. Um like you have to go to the you have to beat the first 2 or 3 levels in each area, maybe 4, maybe 5, it
Yeah.
depends, and before you get to the save point. And then from there you can beat a level, go back to the save point and save, beat a level, go back to the save point and save. So like there are ways around it, which is nice. But you have to be able to beat the first 3 or 4 levels, and if you're smart, after you beat a boss, you can go back to the previous area, save, and then go to the new area, the new
Yeah.
zone as
Yeah.
well. So when playing it, I played it on my Super Nintendo Mini, and I
Mhm.
was just I was fully prepared. I'm like, you know what? I'm probably going to have to use save states. I'm going to try not to, but some of these old games, I'm not. I'm going to beat it. I try not to use save states if I can, because I want to beat the game the way it was intended. But if a game is too difficult and I want to see the full thing, I have no issue using it, type of thing. And I was very pleasantly surprised I never had to use save states.
Mm. Yeah. I
I
mean,
I was so surprised about that.
yeah, it is one of those games. You're right, that does have it does have these like bottleneck moments of when you get to some of the worlds. I mean, I'm trying to think like when you would get to the ice world, for example, which I think is like the 4th world in the game. Like those levels, because of the slipperiness of the floor and everything, like they would be truly challenging. And I felt like with Donkey Kong, especially if you're playing it for the first time, I suppose, like lives is something that actually matters in that game. Which, if you play something like Mario or Sonic, I would argue that they tend to be less important, especially now when you play a Mario game. Like the lives, you can get up to 99 quite easily and not have to worry about it. But with Donkey Kong, every life you lost mattered, and then when you lost them all, it's like, right, I've got to go back, as you say, to the last point that I saved through I think it's Candy Kong, when you go to one of her stations, and it may be that you are repeating the same levels because you're having trouble on one particular level and losing your lives on that, and then you've got to go back again. But I think there's only a few moments where that sort of stuff happens. And have you played? Did you play any of the sequels before you played this, or is this your first Donkey Kong Country?
I might have like dabbled in some of the sequels, like very, very little, very, very little, like maybe like 5 minutes top. So I don't really have, like, I definitely played the original. I mean, prior to me playing through and beating it this year, I probably collectively over the years played about 5 to 6 hours worth. Like, just, I would play like a couple levels and then I would get frustrated and rage quit. And then I'd do it again. And for some reason, just doing it this year, it just like setting it down with the intention of like, this isn't just for fun. This is like my objective is for the show.
Mhm.
It, I got a lot better, a lot more quickly. It was a very surreal. Like some of the levels that used to give me so much trouble, I was able to kind of get through. Though I swear some of them I lucked through, but you know what? I still beat it without save states, so I'll take it.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because Donkey Kong Country 2, uh, you have to pay coins to save in that game, which is an interesting choice to make. I think the first time you use one of the save stations, it's free, but if you were to reuse it again, then suddenly you have to start paying coins that you collect in the stages. Um, but that game, that game in particular, I think is the toughest of the 3 personally, because but at the same time, I think that's the best in the original trilogy for sure, because they get even more creative with the level design. They get more creative with the animals that you can even become the animals at a certain point. It's not just
Mm.
riding them. Um, but yeah, it's definitely, it was one of the tougher platformers at the time for sure, especially if you compare it with some of the other popular ones that were out around then.
I'm excited to dive into the second and third one at some point. I will do it at some point for the show. I actually was hoping to cover 1 through 3 straight, but I don't think the way the schedule for my show is looking this year, I don't think that's going to happen, and that's fine. But it's wild to me this year more than any other previous year on the show. I have so many of my episodes pre-planned out. Like I'm looking at my list like right now. I have slots for like Patreon games that people will vote on. So if you include those, I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more episodes that are not already planned out, which is just I've never been that far ahead. So I don't think I'm going to get to them this year, to say the least. But yeah. All right. Moving on, I wanted to ask you, how did you approach the format of this book? Like I mentioned before, you have a lot of in-depth reviews for this as opposed to quick hits. What kind of made you gravitate towards writing these longer, multi-page reviews of some of these games? Some of these, I'm honestly surprised. Like you wrote, the first entry is for 51 worldwide games, and if I were trying to review that on my podcast, I wouldn't, because it's just like, it's just, here's Texas Hold'em, here's I can't even think of all the different games, but there's 51 other games. I don't even own it, but like I wouldn't, I probably wouldn't cover it. So I totally get why you chose to include it in the book, because I could see how these games are relaxing, but I think I'm just impressed that you did full reviews for a lot of these games, and some of them I don't know what I would have even been able to write about. So what kind of talk about the format of the book, what led you to these longer form entries on each of these games?
So I think it's because, well, part of the reason is what I was comfortable with writing. It's what I've been writing, much of my journalistic life was reviews. And so, whenever it came to reviewing a game, that would be around the level, word count that I would tend to naturally write around, because, you never wanted a review to go on too long, because you're either revealing too much or you're droning on, and you didn't want it to be too short necessarily, because then it's not giving enough information to the reader to make that decision of, is this for me? Is this a good game? Is it a bad game? So there was that side of it. The other side as well is that, I've been told in the past that the way I write comes across quite comfortable. It's not. I'm not writing in ways that's, because I'm not intelligent enough to come across very clever, and I think it just made it more approachable. And so I wanted to, particularly for a book that's focused on feeling relaxed and games that help you relax, I thought that would be, a great way to illustrate these titles. And so another element of that as well is, when you only have a quarter page or a half a page to talk about a game, you don't really have the space to then also include illustrations of those games. And I felt like, especially when you're looking at relaxing video games, you want those illustrations, because visually that's what can help sell that product as well, in terms of, wow, from a visual perspective, Animal Crossing looks so charming and delightful. Or look at Tetris Effect with just all the colors and effects that are going on there.
Mm-hmm.
So opening it up and saying, let's not limit it to 130, 250 words. Let's just let this game breathe and write about what needs to be written about to get the message across as why it's here. And then we've got the space as well to just show the game off visually. And I had sort of like a general idea of what each game needed to include. It was an introduction. It was, like lighthearted introduction, setting the scene. It was explaining what the game was, and it was highlighting why this game is relaxing, because I thought that was key as well. And that sometimes could take a couple of paragraphs, because, in those games that are not immediately apparent, like The Quarry or Donkey Kong Country, a sentence isn't going to cut it, because I could just say the music is relaxing. But I felt it needed a bit more, to really to sell that, or else people would start to call foul and go, well, hang on a minute, like I don't buy this. Why is this in here? And then the other side as well is that, hopefully the book, yes, gamers first and foremost would be interested in it, but for those that, casual gamers, or maybe not necessarily play too much gaming at all, I wanted each game to be explained in a way that if they had never heard of it, they could walk away and understand what that game was and if it was for them. And the same way, I suppose, with gamers as well. Like, there's games on that list that I'd never heard of, or not necessarily not heard of, but not played. And it's like if I was coming into this game in this chapter in this book, what would I want to read in order to make that decision or understand what this video game is? And so that's really the reason, the approach to writing longer chapters for each game, as opposed to these short little. This is what this game is. Here's a little screenshot. Let's move on, because I felt it didn't necessarily fit with this style of book that I was going
Yeah.
for.
And I like that because I'm so used to kind of having these quick hits and like, oh, this is an interesting game. Okay, so this is what it's all about. Okay, cool. But yours has a little bit more depth to it, and it makes it like I said, I wouldn't have read up like 2 or 3 pages on 51 worldwide games otherwise. But at the same time, I loved seeing the breakdown of the games that were a little bit less conventional, like we mentioned already before so many times, Donkey Kong Country and the Quarry and stuff like that. But there's even ones on here that like I was surprised to see, like what was the one, American Truck Simulator. Because it's like, I get it, actually. I've never personally played this, but I could totally see, just driving on a highway for hours on end. I like driving my car, so I could imagine in a kind of a video game sense, driving a truck like that would be just as relaxing. Now, you mentioned in the introduction to the book, about how games soothe your anxiety. And we've talked about that kind of nebulously throughout the episode. What games within this book have helped you the most with that? And also, which genres of games do you feel you gravitate towards to kind of help relieve anxiety, as well as just you find the most relaxing?
I think from a genre perspective, puzzle games are ones that I tend to always go into thinking this is going to work. This is going to be perfect for me. This is going to be great. And I think the reason personally for me is that your mind is so focused on solving a problem, and so it doesn't then leave me open for my mind to wander and think about 50 different things. It's like, I need to solve, in the case of Picross, I need to solve this grid. I need to figure out what squares to shade in, and I put all my effort into that. And so when it comes to puzzle games, I think they tend to work really well for me. But then individual games, like you just have your own personal favorites. And I think that comes down to a combination of things, of the type of game they are, what your personal favorite genre of game is, but then also, if you've been playing that game and become comfortable with it as well, that you can rely on it, it's dependable. So Animal Crossing is one that I'm always gonna. I played it since the first one on the GameCube when it came over to the US and Europe, but New Horizons, because it was really impactful for my wife and I and got us through a particularly horrible time. That's always going to stick with me, and it's one that I still return to just to make sure my islanders know I'm still alive. But a cheat one, I suppose, is Pikmin Bloom, because I could, that's forcing me to go outside at the end of the day, and going outside is a great way, like get some fresh air and just clear your mind. So that's kind of a cheap answer, I suppose.
No. I think it's. I don't think I'm going to actually double check to see if it's in the book. Otherwise, I'll feel bad if it was and I just forgot. No, I don't see it. That's good. It's kind of similar though. Pokemon Go. You have Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, but Pokemon Go kind of did a similar thing for me, just to get me outside. And I've joked around on the show before, and I really need to do an episode on it at some point, because I joke around that Pokemon Go, the summer of Pokemon Go, was the closest we ever got to world peace in my lifetime. Just because everybody of all political ideologies and backgrounds and all this other stuff, we were all going out catching Pokemon out in public spaces. And oh my gosh, I need to, know what's crazy? In 2 years, not this year, but in the summer of 2016, it'll be 10 years old, Pokemon Go.
Oof.
Which doesn't seem possible. That doesn't feel like it was that long ago. But it was. It's been 8 years just about.
Wow.
And I should probably do an episode on Pokemon Go. But like that game, like, once again, I was talking before about context. There's a lot of context needed to talk about Pokemon Go in order to understand the importance of that game for the summer of 2016.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the moment it really hit how popular that game was, we went out to a bar one evening, my friends and I, and there was a group of young women there, and they were all chatting, and obviously we're stood at the bar, and you overhear conversations, and they're talking about their favorite Pokemon in Pokemon Go, and you're just like, this would never have happened, like, 10 years ago at
We would have
all,
been
like,
ridiculed for
yeah.
this.
When I was, I would have had to have like really made an effort to not talk about video games to be interesting to someone. Yet now, like they're saying, oh, my favorite, I prefer and it wasn't even the obvious Pokemon. It was like, oh, I like Pidgeot, and it's like, what?
I mean,
Like,
I'm always partial to Pidgeot as
oh
well. I
yeah,
always thought that
no,
was cool.
yeah. I've got a plushie behind me of Pidgeot, and Cypher is the other one. Those are the two that.
Shout out to Nidoking. That was always one of my favorites. That's real. That's funny. That is really true, though, man. This is a complete tangent, and we'll only touch on this for a little bit. But it is kind of wild to see how much video games have become normalized in society and culture. Like it's cool for a lot of younger kids to play video games, whereas me growing up, it wasn't necessarily. I grew up kind of luckily. I was born in '89, so like when I was in high school, people still played video games, but I didn't really get bullied for it. But I definitely was not a popular kid,
Yeah, no,
to say the least.
Yeah.
So I there was a lot of people who definitely did not play video games in my high school, but now it seems like almost everyone does. It's such a weird thing for me to see where it's not like this subculture. Now it's kind of coming into the mainstream.
Yeah, and I think like smart devices are a big influence on that for sure, because I was born in '88, so when I was at school, again, wasn't bullied for being a gamer, but when it came to who was playing games, it was the guys basically, and it would be because you only had like an SNES or a Nintendo 64 to really play games, or of course the PlayStation, things like that. It was more of you had to go out and buy a console specifically to play games, whereas now everyone has a phone for the most part, and so
Yep.
these franchises are appearing on phones, and so that's their gateway into the world of video games. But then movies and TV shows are popping up more and more now, and the quality of them are improving, like the Mario movie, the Sonic movie. I mean, it's great. My son, he's 5, and he cannot wait for the third Sonic movie that comes out this Christmas, and it's one of those things, like, I get to share that with him now. Like, I can remember playing Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and 2 when they came out, and of course back then it wasn't something that everyone like and their dog knew about Sonic the Hedgehog. But now, I mean, it's crazy. Dropping my kid off at school, I was wearing a Sonic t-shirt, and this kid just said, I really like your t-shirt. I prefer Tails. And it's just like,
dude, that, oh my gosh, memory unlocked. Sorry, finish your story.
No, that was pretty much it.
I just memory unlocked. So at my work, there's a park near my work that I will periodically drive over to and rollerblade there, because I feel I don't want to rollerblade on my work's property. I feel like I'd get in trouble for that, so I don't do that. But I was rollerblading, and I wore a Star Fox t-shirt. And this kid probably had been like 14 years old. And he goes, "Hey, Star Fox." And I went, "Excuse me? There hasn't even really been a Star Fox, like a new Star Fox game in like over a decade." And okay, all right, cool. Wow.
That's impressive. Like, as you say, I think the last one was on the Wii U, and even that one wasn't a huge.
No, because it was on the Wii U.
Yeah, exactly. As much as I wanted to love that game, it was really tough with the control scheme in that thing, and it's a shame, because that would be a franchise I would love to see come back. And I don't know if it's in. The thing is, it's almost like with Nintendo and again, I'm getting sidetracked, so I do apologize.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
With Star Fox, it's one of those things that feels like Nintendo's experimental franchise, where they've tried to just make more of the same. They've tried to do it where it's like Legend of Zelda with Rare. They've tried to do it where it's got weird control schemes. And I think there was a DS one called Command, which was where you could plot out your path on the touchscreen, and you would then go into like a big like a battle, like an open world battle in that as you're moving around the map. So it seems like they've tried all sorts of things with it and not quite hit the mark with it. But never. I'm sure we'll probably see that franchise again at some point. When we had a new F-Zero last year, which I never thought would happen again. Given where that franchise was, but you know.
Now, this is one last kind of tangent type of question, not related to the book, and then we'll get back to your book. But just because I literally asked this last week, sort of, I'm assuming then you mentioned you played Sonic. So did you grow up with a Mega Drive?
Yeah, Mega Drive and an SNES as well.
Okay. So, because I've only asked this to Americans, so we have our inherent biases and whatnot. Obviously, the Mega Drive was called the Mega Drive for you. It was called the Genesis for us.
Hmm.
In your mind, what do you think is just a cooler sounding name, the Sega Genesis or the Sega Mega Drive?
I had a feeling that was going to be the question.
Not which system is better. I feel like in Europe and UK you had a more variety of games than we did, and I know there's a lot more Sega fandom over there, but just purely based on the names is kind of what I'm getting at.
I mean, for me, I don't know. Mega Drive to me is one that sounds cooler because it's got that word mega in it, and back then it was all about one upping, wasn't it, versus the SNES. And
Yeah.
like Genesis is one of those things that, and you may have the answer, but what did that mean necessarily? The Sega Genesis compared to the Mega Drive, which was just trying to boast about how powerful it was. It's mega. It's awesome. It's better
Well,
than this and
Genesis
this.
is the origin. It's the beginning of everything. So that to me and that's why I'm glad I asked, because to me Genesis sounds cooler, but I don't know how much of that is my nostalgia bias,
Exactly. Yeah, that
and
might
that's
be
what
the same for me as well. In that
well, and
that's
that's
what I
why I
grew up
wanted to
with.
ask someone who's not from the US, like just purely aesthetics. Like, what do you like aesthetically more? The Mega Drive. See, I always found Mega Drive the name. The reason I as an adult now I've kind of rationalized it is that Mega is just it feels like a lazy descriptor to me now.
Mm.
Like, oh, this is mega cool. Oh, this is mega that. And so if it's a Mega Drive, I'm like, well, if without the word mega, is this just the Sega Drive? I don't know. It didn't work as well for me. But once again, there's definitely nostalgia playing into that. So I'm happy I got your take on it. We got a little bit of contrast going on here.
I mean, let me throw this at you then. As for the SNES, the coloring of the buttons and the console were different, weren't they, between Europe and US?
Yes. Did you have the similar style to what was in Japan? Like
Yeah, yeah. So it was the red,
I
green,
prefer
yellow, and
what you
blue.
guys had.
Yeah, okay. I think that's the general, feeling from regardless of where you're from, is that the Japanese and the European color scheme was preferred. I was just curious on your side if it was,
No,
because was it more of a purple color, the buttons, if I remember?
I actually am looking at one right now. Yes, it was like a purple and gray scheme, like the what is it? Let me double check. Where are you?
I feel game controllers need to be using the primary colors more. I miss that.
I do too. The A and B buttons were dark purple, and then the X and Y buttons were kind of like a light purple,
Okay.
closer to gray-ish,
Hmm.
but definitely more light purple. And then obviously the controller itself is gray versus what you guys had was, A was red, B was yellow, Y was green, X was blue, and then
Hmm.
everything else was gray, but still like you had like I don't know, I like that a little bit more. It's a little bit more. It stands out a little bit more. I also want consoles to have like menu music again, like the Wii did.
Oh
Like
yeah,
I want that to come back. But anyway, we're getting sidetracked.
yeah.
I, I'm glad I asked that though, because the whole Genesis versus Mega Drive, not really debate. I don't really consider debate. I don't think any. I think clearly Mega Drive technically won just based off pure percentages of just what it was called outside of the US and North America and whatnot. But I don't know. Genesis just sounds cooler to me. Anyway, so to wrap up, well, not wrap. I have one more question for you, but before I kind of go into wrap up questions, and the one question I have is like we mentioned at the top of the episode that you work in Games Press. You work for Nintendo Insider. You're a reviewer for Nintendo Insider, and you also work at Fan Census. How did your work in the games and in the games press and games journalism and whatnot affect your or shape your views of relaxing games?
So I think through when I started at Fan Census, this was 11 years ago. Before that, I was just a teenager who really, really enjoyed video games and wanted to try and be a part of that industry any way they could. But of course, video gaming is an expensive hobby. So what you play, you have to make very conscious decisions of, if I buy this, I can't buy that. If I buy that, but then I can't buy this. So in being in that position, the games I would play would tend to sort of stick with a certain type of genre, a certain type of game. But then when I got my job at FanCensus, and FanCensus basically is a company that works with game developers and game publishers, data analytics company analyzing press, social media, commercial data for video games. It then basically pulled back the curtain for me to see what was going on behind the scenes, to see the sausage get made, so to speak, with these video games, and the people who are behind working at big publishers like Square Enix and Capcom and Nintendo. And then that then opened the door on working at Nintendo Insider. So suddenly I was exposed to a whole slew of other video game genres and games that beforehand, when I had to make those choices, I probably wouldn't have given the time of day because I couldn't afford to. But as you review games, you get sent codes all the time. When I'm working, at FanCensus, we work with a lot of publishers, and of course, you get free codes from friends that you make and things like that. And so it would then open my eyes to these other types of games, and relaxing was one of them. Because, as I say, I have played relaxing games throughout my life, but it opened my eyes to so many more that exist out there. And I feel like over the last, 5 to 10 years, we're seeing more and more examples of those games. Wholesome games is another thing that people tend to use a lot term wise. We even have a wholesome direct now that occurs, which is purely focused on those chilled, relaxed type video games. And so, as I say, I think because I've been in a position where I can have access to all these different types, it's then allowed me to get a better knowledge of these genres. And so, RPGs is something I never would have devoted too much time to. I think the most RPG-like game I would play was Paper Mario, which is quite a light RPG when you compare it with the likes of Final Fantasy or all sorts of RPGs like that. But as I say, because I had opportunities where I could play some of these, now they're games that I will always search out. Like Persona 5 is one of my favorite games now, having played that back in 2017. And I'm working my way through Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, which I absolutely adore every moment of that game and the previous one. Whereas the old version of me would have been, why have they turned this button bashing brawler into an RPG? No, bring it back. I don't want that. Whereas now I'm like, no, keep going in this direction. I absolutely love it. So, as I say, it's and being behind the scenes and seeing the surge in popularity when it comes to press coverage of these games, like websites are reporting on these smaller indie wholesome games, or YouTubers are playing these games. I mean, you see Balatro more recently has come out, which is a poker roguelike game.
Yeah.
And that's picking up a lot of traction, which is great to see. It's not just the big AAAs all the time. And of course, you'll see websites report on those more so because those are the ones that draw eyes. But over the years, I've definitely noticed that these smaller types of games, or ones that are of more niche genres that are not your action adventures or your shooters, are getting more attention, and rightfully so, because, as I say, Balatro is one that I've played, and it's probably one of my favorite games this year so far. It's absolutely incredible what that game is, and it doesn't need these big AAA graphics. It doesn't need this huge budget. It's just one person who has made this game and made it so well. So yeah, it's been interesting to see behind the scenes what the changes, the trends over the years from the coverage that you see and the popularity of these relaxing types of games. And as I say, working at Nintendo Insider then gave me the confidence to, I'm writing about games. I'm not getting emails or tweets saying you suck, so that's a good start.
Yeah.
and then it was like, I want to look for a new challenge. I've got ideas for books. Let's try that. And so with all that knowledge I have working at FanSense, with that experience I have writing at Nintendo Insider, that gave me enough confidence. I'm not going to say I was super confident, but it gave me enough confidence to take that leap, basically.
That's really cool. And I never really would have thought about the fact that going into games journalism or going into the games industry in some way, shape, or form, at least in the media side, would have I never thought about the fact that with the review codes you receive, you probably have been forced out of your comfort zone in a good way, like to
Mm.
try out these new things that you may not have tried before. I kind of find similarly with my podcast, like I have played games that I would not really have any interest in playing, though the one genre I have yet to crack is horror. I have tried to do horror so many times, but I hate being scared. I can't I can't do it. I tried playing, what is it, the first Dead Space game, and I just couldn't do it. It
Hmm.
just I
Yeah.
couldn't get into it. I'll eventually figure it out at some point, but man, like it's the same thing like Resident Evil games. I have yet to really try them because I just don't like horror. I don't like being scared. It's
Yeah.
not my cup of tea.
I mean, the later ones, I suppose, like Resident Evil 4, 5. I wouldn't necessarily recommend 6. Not because it's scary, just because of how good that game
I've
is.
heard they're more action based.
They are absolutely. I think 4 does have elements of horror. The remake they did does feel like they put a bit more horror back into it, but yeah, they feel more like a horror action. You know, it's like the aliens to the original Alien in a way. It
It's
sort
kind
of
of
does.
like what is it? The Fear games. I always liked the first Fear game. I never really played the second one, but I always liked the first Fear game a lot because it was hard, but it was a first person shooter at the same time,
Yeah, yeah.
so it was a
It's
lot easier to
interesting
handle.
for sure, and it's interesting to see that genre change. Like there was a point where I guess thanks to Resident Evil 4, developers and publishers felt the need to skew more action focused to something like Gears of War or Call of Duty. But
Hmm.
now we're seeing those franchises and new IPs return back to sort of what horror was known for, which was being a horror first and foremost, or surviving rather than just I've got unlimited bullets, let's mow everything down. And you know, it's great. It's great to see. Alan Wake 2 came out late last year, and that I wouldn't necessarily call an action focus. You know, you are limited in what you have. It can be quite scary. It's very strange, very weird, which you know Remedy is known for, which is awesome. Um, but yeah, I'm one of those people that I could sit and watch horror all day long. I am probably like the biggest scaredy cat when it comes to horror. Like I jump off the sofa when I'm playing these games, or playing Resident Evil 7 in VR on the PlayStation 4. Like I've never been so sweaty in all my life playing a video game or just in general because of just like not like that not being able to escape. It feels like yes you can close your eyes but you feel in it, you know, of course
Yeah,
that's what VR is all about, but for some reason it's like I can't stop. It's probably an unhealthy relationship, but
hmm
like I keep wanting to return and be scared in different ways and jump out of my skin. But I understand it's not for everyone at the end of the day. I
you are
mean,
braver than I.
I
You are
or is it
braver than I.
stupid? There's a fine line, between it. But I know someone at Capcom, of course, who pioneers the horror franchise with Resident Evil. They can't stand horror at all. The closest they'll get, they said, is they'll watch influencers play the game on YouTube, but they won't go anywhere near it. If they
That's
get
funny.
if they get a code for Resident Evil, they're like, no, thank you.
I don't blame them. I don't blame them. But all right, I have two final questions to wrap this up. I kind of, it's been a minute since I've done an interview. So the way I end my interviews, Ryan, is I have two kind of closing questions. One is questions from Courtney. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da. Questions from Courtney. Courtney is my wife. I make up a different jingle every time. And as we've talked before, off mic and on mic, she's not into games, so she knows nothing about what you do, knows nothing about what we're talking about. And I kind of like that. I like that little approach. So her random question out of the blue, has no idea about what you do, is what is your favorite medium to color with? Meaning crayon, pencil, marker, chalk, paints, etc. Like what's your favorite medium to color with?
Pencil, I suppose. But
Pencil?
yeah,
Okay.
I think it's just because I mean I used to study art, GCSE at school and everything, so they would be very much into shading things like that. So I think I was just pencil would be the go to, whether it was just your normal grey pencils or colouring pencils. Because and this is a really boring answer because I'm going on and on, but
No, no, no.
like
I'm listening. Keep going.
it gives you the ability to apply different depths of color to it by pushing harder or
I
just
could
doing
see that.
lightly and things like that. So
Or applying more to a specific area in general. Like you could have a little less pencil strokes, I guess, for lack of a better word, to make it lighter in one area and darker in others.
Absolutely. And I think also pencil, you can tend to correct mistakes, which, the idea of using charcoal or pen would always freak me out, in that if I make a mistake, then I can't really do much with this. I can't fix that. So yeah, pencil would be my choice.
All right. And then the final question I have for you is I'm a huge fan of Alan Alda's podcast, which I haven't actually listened to in a little bit. It's called Clear and Vivid. And he ends his interviews with different questions, or 7 quick questions that invite 7 quick answers. I'm not going to ask all 7 questions. Don't worry. I'm only going to pick one. But I like his questions a lot because his podcast is all about communication. And so some of the ones I haven't really read all of them on the show, so I'm actually going to read some of the others on here, but that's not the one I'm going to ask you. But just so my listeners know, like, what other things does he talk about? Since his show is about communication, I can't really ask some of these because this is more about video games. But like, one is, how do you stop a compulsive talker, which I feel very attacked by, Alan. Thank you very much. How do you strike up a real, genuine conversation? What gives you confidence? Stuff like that. How do you tell someone they have their facts wrong? That's a really good one. Once again, all about communication. But since this podcast is not in the business of communication, we're in the business of video games, I only really gravitate towards like 3 different questions. And this one I haven't asked in a while, so I'm going to go to this one here. What's the strangest question anyone has ever asked you?
Whew. That is a tough one.
I mean, you can go right with gut instinct as well, not necessarily declare it definitively. This is definitely the most strange I've ever been asked. But like, when you hear that and you think about like strange questions someone has asked you, what's one thing that pops to your mind?
I suppose this was a strange question. Again, out in a club and with some friends. And so back when I started working at Fan Census, my friends would always say, he works in video games, he works in this. And the strangest question, I think, well, one that just springs to mind immediately was, what's it like? What was it like when you made Mario? Which was just the most like unexpected question. Like, just like that they would think, like, because you work in video games, you must have been responsible for the most famous video game character of all time. And that caught me off guard at the time, and I thought, that's really strange.
That's like saying, well, because you're an author now, right? So imagine going to that club again, and your friends say, "Oh yeah, he's an author. He's writing books." And they're like, "Oh, how was it like writing the Iliad?"
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like,
how are you enjoying that?
Just a little bit before I was born.
Money.
Yeah. So you're like, how's that Lord of the Rings money treating you?
I mean, there's probably others as well that may be even stranger than that, but that's the one that whenever someone's sort of like, for amusing stories, or when, funny things that have happened to you when you've been out, that's one that always pops into my head because it was just amusing. I think my friends were trying to, like, embarrass me in front of people because it's like, he works in video games, he's got such a weird job. And then, yeah, that was the response was, oh, yeah, tell me about this Mario character like that you made. Like, what are you going to do with him next? Like, what are you going to make with him next? Is he going to go into space?
You should have just played along with it.
Yeah,
you should have been like, oh man, well, let me tell you, Mario, he's going to get a drug addiction in the next game.
Yeah, what we thought was, Mario isn't gritty enough, so we're going to look at GTA and take inspiration from that. And so now it's going to be Mario just driving around, just like on the run from the police, all sorts of stuff like that. It's going to be great. Keep a lookout. It's going to come out in a year's time. Trust me.
Those 1-up mushrooms aren't going to give him a 1-up in our new game.
Yeah. I was going to say those mushrooms are pretty magic, but then Nintendo have released Mario Wonder, which you can't help but look at and go, there's like, that has to be some sort of like, drug reference there, when he takes one of those flowers and everything just completely goes nuts. But,
oh yeah, with Super Mario 1, I have yet to play Wonder. Actually, I've been meaning to for some time, but I sadly don't have a copy yet. I'll have to get one at some point.
Definitely worth checking out. It's just like, and I feel like Nintendo continue to do this, and call it bias because I've been playing Nintendo games since I was a kid, and I write for a Nintendo site. But for me, when their games come out, they manage to reinvent at least their bigger franchises in ways that just take you back to when you first played one of those games in that series. Like playing Mario Galaxy 2, for example, picking that up and
Hmm.
playing it, it felt like the first time I was playing Super Mario World as a kid. Playing Mario Wonder just gives you that, that
That
sense
same
of,
sense.
exactly, and a sense of wonder in a way. Like, you don't know what's going to happen in the next stage you play, how it's going to surprise you. Um, and they did that with Tears of the Kingdom, a game that everyone initially was, this is Breath of the Wild DLC. This is just going to be more of the same, and then it came out and it absolutely was not. And again, it would surprise in a lot of ways. Some that, if you're able to go into that game without knowing, are just like truly jaw-dropping moments. If you've played it, I'm sure you would know probably some of them that I'm
Tears of the
talking
Kingdom, you
about.
mean?
Yeah,
I've played a little bit of it, but I actually don't know too many of the. I probably don't know the jaw dropping moments. I've been meaning to really seriously try it, but once again, as I was telling you off mic, I don't have necessarily as much time as I would like, and since that game is, well, it's long. I
yeah,
don't know
no.
if I'm going to have time to play it anytime soon. I need to though. I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're picking your battles at the end of the day, aren't you? It's like, if I look like now, I look at the year and it's like, right, outside of reviews, I've got to pick those lengthier adventures that I can squeeze in, and then everything else needs to be shorter experiences. If I'm, going to, like, playing Infinite Wealth, I mean, I'm about 40 hours into that and still many chapters away from finishing that thing. And so it's like, right, there's Final Fantasy, there is Dragon's Dogma. Like, I got to really think about what I'm going to try and fit into the rest of the year, and then that's
Hmm.
before we even know what's coming out later in the year. I mean, the second half is a big question mark for when you look at big releases. So yeah, I totally hear you when you say about time being the deciding factor with big games like that.
I mean, I am lucky where I don't work in like the games press per se. Like I have been asked to review games. I actually, one of the games I was telling you about off mic, one of the RPGs I'm playing is for I got a review code for from the indie dev. But like that, I'm not under any time crunch to do. It's not like games journalists where you have to, hey, get this game out and you have to have it reviewed by such and such date, which is like less than a week away, and you have
Mm.
to crunch through an 80-hour RPG in like 5 days or something like that, which or less. Like I don't think I could handle that. That's so I am lucky in the sense that what I have to deal with is not um nearly as stressful, I should say. So I I don't have any time limits. I could wait 5 years to cover Tears of the Kingdom if I want to. But in any case, we are going to wrap up this episode, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining me, man. This was a lot of fun. This was a really fun conversation with you. Um, so I guess the last question is, it's not even a interview question. It's just, where can everyone find you online? And is there anything you'd like to promote? Obviously the book, but the book, what else do you got going on?
So, I mean, I continue to write reviews at Nintendo Insider, so you'll see me pop up on there with whatever comes out. Uh, and then, as I say, with my book just coming out, that's now out in the UK, and it's coming out to the US and other territories like Germany, I think, and other territories in Europe at the end of May. So that's, yeah, and then I'm working on a second book and a third book at the moment, actually,
Oh,
which
wow.
the second one's just gone in for the first draft to check over that. I don't think I can tell you the subject of it just yet, but I will say it's going to be a similar style to this one in the way it's presented and the writing style and everything. And then the third one will be, which is I'm in the middle of at the moment, will be a more encyclopedia style of book
Okay.
covering a subject. But that one's going to be a ways off. That's one of those cases where I list out the games and look at the number of them, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, this is definitely a lot more than the first book and the second book as well. Yeah, and then I mean, I'm on Twitter/X at Janes as well, where I'll just be posting all sorts of gaming nonsense there as well, or just general life stuff. Picked up a Lego set today, so I just felt the need to show people that. So it's
I
just,
think I saw that. It's a Dungeons and Dragons one, right?
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Took
that's awesome.
a lot of courage to get that because of the cost of it. But then, again, Lego is like video games for me, where I find that really relaxing and a good way to unwind. So my wife convinced me to just pick it up and say, "Don't even think about it, just do it." So yeah, that's where you'll be able to find me.
Dude, same with Lego. I actually had to stop buying Legos because I don't have space for them.
That is a
Like
big problem, yeah.
I have I have a bunch set up. I'm like, they're just sitting there. They look really nice, but I have nothing to do with them. I love Lego. But yeah, no, everyone go check out Ryan over on Twitter. I will make sure to include links to your Twitter as well as to where people can buy your book. I'll have a link to the book in the show notes. So please go check it out there. As for myself, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Still Loading Pod on all of them. Also Twitch at Still Loading Pod, Blue Sky at Still Loading Pod, Threads at Still Loading Pod, all those different places. At Still Loading Podcast over on YouTube, which actually ever since I uploaded the show to the YouTube Music, I suddenly got like 20 new subscribers, which was surprising considering my like it's an audio only podcast. I don't have video. It's not like there's anything for people to watch other than just listen to the audio. So I was pleasantly surprised by that. So thank you to anyone who may have subscribed or discovered the show through that. If you want to support the show, you can do so in a number of ways. Please consider giving it a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcast or whichever podcasting app you use, because that helps more people find the show and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. And I like feeling warm and fuzzy, and it pleases the algorithm gods, or so I'm told. Well, who knows about that? But either way, it does help the show, and it only costs you a little bit of time. So please consider doing that. If you really like the show and you want to throw a couple bucks my way, I got a bunch of extra goodies for that, for people who are willing to do that. Patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you get all the episodes a little bit earlier with better audio quality, as well as access to patron voting rights, which I mentioned before, the backlog month stuff. But there's also quarterly patron polls, which at the time this episode comes out, we will be actually a little ways. I just finished up a poll a couple weeks ago on a game, and it's going to be Astral Chain. That is the next Patreon poll topic. So an episode on Astral Chain will be coming out in sometime in July. And actually, now that I'm thinking about this, the most recent Patreon poll episode was Zillion just 2 weeks ago. Zillion for the Sega Master System. So you can help guide the direction of the show, all that good stuff, for about $1 a month. For $3 a month, you get everything at the $1 level, plus you get a patron shout out at the beginning of each episode, like you all heard at the beginning of this one. For $4 a month, you get everything I mentioned prior, plus access to 2 mini bonus episodes, which has a bunch of different gaming related topics. And now there's over like 60 of them at the time this comes out. There's over 60 bonus episodes. So there's a lot of stuff that you can catch up on. And for $5 a month, the last tier that I shout out here is everything. You get everything I mentioned prior, plus access to Still Bonding, which is my monthly James Bond podcast where me and a bunch of friends bond over 007. Though once James Bond is over, which it will end this year, we are in the Daniel Craig era officially. We're going to probably be moving on to either Kevin Smith stuff like the Clerks in Askew Universe and stuff like that, or Fast and Furious. I'm really leaning towards Fast and Furious though, so we'll see. There's lots of stuff, lots of bonus content over there. Patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But that's it. That's all the time I have for you on this episode of Still Loading. Ryan, thank you once again for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had a great time just chatting games.
It was a really fun time, man. I love chatting with you before we recorded, and probably chat a little bit after. Who knows? But yeah, that's it. That's all the time I have for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time.